This is an ABC News special report.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel reporting tonight from London. I know that some of you have over the past several, indeed the past many hours, been watching my colleague Peter Jennings. I hope Peter is still sitting there in New York. Some of you have been watching local broadcasts. Peter, before I let you go, and Lord knows you have been putting in Herculean labors over these past few hours, this is so much, this business that you and I are in is so much a matter of perspective. Those of you who were watching at the end of these last few minutes when you were talking know that the perspective of people who are in agony, waiting and wondering whether their loved ones are still alive, that perspective is perhaps the easiest to understand. There are people also laboring with whom you've been talking at response and what the United States as a great nation is going to do in response to all of this. I wanted to get from you, before you go off and get some well-deserved rest, just your perspective on what you've been covering together with our ABC News colleagues over these last many hours, and your thoughts before you leave for this evening.
I think it's very difficult, Ted. I think you put your finger on something really important. Those of us who do these kind of jobs are, in some respects, robbed of perspective because we're operating in a pretty isolated environment. And we're the beneficiaries of people's anger and analysis and love and affection and sorrow and hope as it gets processed through the news division. But one of the things it's very hard to do is to have an overall sense of perspective sitting in this chair over many, many hours. But you also say something else which is hard for the country to understand, hard for all of us to understand, both individually and collectively, I think, at times like this, and that is simply how complicated this is. When a nation as great as this, which stands in most respects for so much that is good, but is seen by so many people, by many people in the world, as standing for things which are not good, is attacked, the nation, particularly if it's powerful and therefore knows its limitations, is, I think, suffused with the notion of anxiety because you can't do as much about it. I think it's very hard for us at the moment to understand how angry many people in the world are at the United States. You know, you and I have the benefits. Please tell me if I go on too long. You and I have had the benefits of working for many years overseas, much of it in the developing world, in my case in the Middle East, in yours in Asia, both of us in Africa. You've just had this extraordinary trip in the Congo. And so we're fortunate. Many Americans are not exposed to the profound antipathy, anger, and now manifested in hatred that people have for the United States because it's a big power and because they see it on the wrong side of issues. So I'll get out of your way at the moment now by just simply saying I think the most difficult thing for me over all of these hours is to have an overall sense of perspective and just try to take advantage of other people's.
Peter, thank you very much. Go off, get some much-deserved rest, and see if you can decompress a little before you have to come back into the hot seat again. The point that you and I have both been making, and it's one that I just want to emphasize before we go into this next phase now of trying to analyze what is going on, is that in this job, the best that you and I can hope to do is to take fragments of what is going on everywhere and by putting it together give people a sense of what is going on. I know many of you have just come back from a long day's work and you want to be updated on the latest news. We will try and do that for you. Some of you have been glued to your television sets all day long and you want some more thoughtful discussion. We will try and add to the thoughtful discussion you've already been hearing in the segments that you've been watching. But I'd like to begin with one of my Nightline colleagues, John Donvan, who has been spending the day putting together a number of reports that we'll be bringing you over the course of the next few hours, one of them having to do with the investigation thus far. And John, if you are in place, and because you and I are thousands of miles apart right now, it's a little difficult sometimes for me to know who is ready and who is not. I'm hoping that John is there either live or on tape, whichever you have. John, if you're live, indicate your presence, would you?
I'm talking to you and hearing you right now, Ted.
Very good. Tell me what you've put together here, and tell our audience at the same time.
Well, what I've really been doing today is relying an awful lot on some very, very good reporting by my colleagues at ABC News and the various bureaus around this city and actually around the country and around the world. All day long we've been hearing anything that ranges from rumor to hard fact and sifting it, and what I'm putting together in a report I think we're about to see is, at this point, the arithmetic of that, what we know so far, what it adds up to, and what it does not add up to. So if that report is ready to go, I think you'll know that and I'll know that, and we'll see it in just a moment. Otherwise, we can keep talking.
For roughly the first 24 hours,
a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Every image spoke of destruction.
We better get out of the way!
Confusion, vulnerability, and darkness. Darkness especially over the questions of who flew those planes into the towers and how did they take control of them and why.
The Department of Justice has undertaken perhaps the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America.
Today, U.S. authorities said they made progress on answering some of those questions. Some of what they were up to we could see. Late last night, the FBI seized a car parked near the American Airlines terminal at Boston's Logan Airport. This was ABC News at sunrise this morning.
And it is believed that that vehicle was being driven by at least some of these suspects. And we're getting further information about that. The Boston Herald is reporting that of those suspects, that they believe one of them was a trained pilot. And, again, consistent with what George was saying just a few minutes ago, that some of these suspects flew to Boston early Tuesday morning from Portland, and that they had entered this country from Canada.
The FBI also identified a hotel that one team spent the night in South Portland, Maine. Two suspects left another rental car in Maine and were seen on videotape.
I can tell you that the two individuals are both males in their mid to late 30s, based on the photo that I saw, and that each one was carrying some type of small shoulder bag. Not a real bulky one, but something small. Both kind of dark-complected, dark hair.
Also this morning, in Coral Springs, Florida, neighbors reported that FBI agents overnight raided a house listed as the address for a man named Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian who was believed to be a hijacker on one of the jets that rammed the World Trade Center. They got the address from Atta's driver's license. He is a known associate of Osama bin Laden. While in Florida, Atta was trained as a pilot by this flight instructor.
We're looking as a commercial outfit in the United States to train people. And if these people come with the right paperwork, immigration, etc., passports, then we did our job and we want to train them.
This morning, the president was on television.
The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
By noon today, some of the shadow apparently lifted. ABC News had learned that the FBI now knew the identity of all of the hijackers, at least 12 of them, from countries that included Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, and in some cases making bomb threats. Our government has credible evidence that the White House and Air Force One were targets. A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Also today, the Boston police raided a hotel, detained 3 people, 2 women and a man. Outside Providence, Rhode Island, they stopped an Amtrak train and took away 1 man. Late afternoon at the White House, the president's spokesman goes public with what before had been only a rumor.
We have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks.
The plane in question is the one that ultimately flew into the Pentagon. Early this evening, investigators were dusting for fingerprints at the check-in counters at Dulles International Airport. Now what happened yesterday makes a little more sense, the way that people were at first evacuated from the White House rather casually, and then when it was realized one of the planes was headed their way, people were told to drop everything and run, and they did. And if Air Force One was a target, it also explains why the president hopscotched around the South for several hours yesterday, escorted by jet fighters, before returning to Washington. Add to all this searches of several houses in at least 3 states, and late tonight, another one in Hamburg, Germany.
Auf die Anschläge auf das World Trade Center und das Pentagon verwickelt gewesen sein. Über die Art der Tatbeteiligung konnte noch nichts gesagt werden, aber die...
And Ted, we have search warrants being executed overnight in Florida, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and as we've said, other states. As far as we know, no arrest warrants have been issued, and there are just so many moving parts to this tonight that there were some of it we decided to discuss outside of the report because it's a little bit slippery. But that raid on the hotel in Boston, it's not really at all clear what happened there. They were led to the hotel reportedly by some information they picked up in one of the rental cars, led them to a specific hotel room there, and agents were surprised when they reached the room they were looking for, opened the door, and 3 people walked out. They detained those people, the 2 women and 1 man that we referred to. They have not arrested them, they have detained them, and it's not clear whether these people were involved or not. In fact, in all of these cases, of all of the people detained today, they're still not saying that they know whether or not for sure that they are suspects. They believe that they may have some link to Osama bin Laden, but they're not sure. Also want to point out, in one sense you can say it's amazingly quick response to already know, they say, the names of all of the hijackers. On the one hand, that is amazing, but what is also amazing is the implication of the fact that these men were receiving pilot training in the United States. Some of them were certified as pilots in the United States over a period that lasted at least a year. They've been here, they've been registered, they've been using their names and addresses and driver's licenses, which is allowing them, authorities now, to track these people to where they actually lived and where they went to school, and they got away with it for all that period of time. Even though a lot of them were known associates of Osama bin Laden and were on watch lists, they weren't being watched at the right time.
Actually, John, you touched on the very question I was just about to raise with you, and I'm going to be asking questions of all of our colleagues tonight, some of which you're not going to be able to answer. But 2 of those people, as you correctly point out, were on an FBI watch list. Is there any explanation yet as to how and why they were able to get into the country?
All we've heard are theories that they may have come in through Canada, they may have been smuggled in, they may have come in using false identity. But even if they came in under false identity or slipped into the country, they very quickly established what you might call standard legal identity. And we're filling out forms with the FAA to apply for pilot's licenses. So no, we don't have an answer to that.
John, I'll be coming back to you several times before our block of programming is over this evening, but thank you for what you've just reported. Nightline's Dave Marish is on the streets of New York City, just a few blocks from the site of the search and rescue effort. And Dave, at times like this, all I can say is, what can you tell us?
Ted, about 5 blocks from here, about 5 blocks south of here, in the absolute center of a brightly flood-lit disaster area, is a large firefighter with an almost as large magnetic whiteboard in front of him that has hundreds of numerical units on it in several colors. These just some of the many units of the New York Fire Department, Police Department, and dozens of other law enforcement and emergency service agencies from the whole metropolitan area that cover this area. It looks something like an anthill because the people are dwarfed by the massive